Well, we'd like to welcome you to an FHC Outdoors exclusive interview with Larry Dahlberg here in Spokane, Washington. The world-renowned angler has traveled through 86 different countries. He's amassed several awards for his efforts, including an International Game Fish Association award. And he's one of the most talented anglers known throughout the world today. Larry, we'd like to welcome you to Spokane, Washington, and we appreciate you sitting down with us today.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate sitting down too, except this chair is so cold I'm freezing my...
It is a little bit chilly out here. You know, just to get right into it, you began fishing at the age of 4, and you started guiding for smallmouth bass at the age of 11, actually with a fly rod in your hand. You know, and through the different amount of awards that you've won over the years, what was the one point in your career that you really decided, you know what, my love of fishing has turned into something bigger?
An old man told me once that if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there.
Okay.
And I was just born with this disease, kind of fishing disease. And I never had any intentions. I grew up in a little town of 931 people. I never planned on leaving. I had everything I needed within 20 miles of where I lived. It was the biggest town in the county. And then all of a sudden here I am. I have really no idea other than I've got a short attention span, and I'm just curious.
Okay.
Otherwise, no plan.
That's a lot of anglers are. That's why we do what we do.
Yeah.
So I get it. Well, your first episode for The Hunt for Big Fish actually aired right here in Washington State in 1993. With that show being kind of all over the map, have you ever kind of thought about doing a domestic series here in the United States?
I've thought about it, but I don't have a formula for anything. I play music. I don't read music. I've been playing since I was 14 years old. I don't think I've ever played a song the same way twice.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I still fish domestically quite a bit, but what I found is that if I fish domestically, you end up putting your finger on a spot. This is where to go, and sometimes it changes it forever.
Okay.
I can't do that.
All right. All right. Well, when it comes to an idea or design, you know, a lot of your fans, obviously you're a well-known lure designer. When it comes to that design, and let's say you're out here on the road and you're doing seminars for, you know, wholesale sports and things like that. If you have an idea, what kind of thing do you jot them down, or
No.
do you just kind of fly by the seat of your pants and?
Excuse me just a second. I'm just going to ignore this. There we go. Sorry about that. Well, what I do is I wait till I get there.
Okay.
I have absolutely no preconceived ideas about anything, but in my travels and my experience as a younger angler, I got to see different environments, and I didn't even know it at first.
Okay.
And then as I've aged, I realize that it's not so much about the fish, it's about the environment and the options that the environment offers this creature.
Okay.
And if you understand the environment, then you can kind of reverse engineer what's really going on. I think having a background both as a fly guy and as a lure guy, my grandpa only fished with live bait, my dad only fished with lures, and the guys I guided were fly fishermen. So I got to look at a lot of different things, and I learned early on that my grandpa and I, with the night crawler, could sit underneath one brush pile and catch as many smallmouth as the fly guys would catch in a 20-mile stretch, you know, just fishing the spots where they'll bite with the fly rod. And as a young man, I came to realize that part of it was putting them in the boat, and the other part of it was how much fun was it in the process.
Okay.
And so I guess as I've matured and grown as an angler, I realize that the more keyholes I can look through and the more different tactics, strategies, mechanics that I can become familiar with, the easier it is to just sort of fake it, you know, like playing a guitar when you really don't know the song.
But it still sounds good.
Well, the orchestra's nature.
Yeah.
You know, it isn't like Twinkle Little Star. You got to listen to what is going on around you, and then you decide what key it's in. I think a lot of times we try to take an approach where it's like, first do this, then do this, then do this, then do this, and then you'll get there. It's not like that.
Okay. Well, on that note, speaking of some of your latest releases with River to Sea, such as the wide glide. We have the diver frog and the clacking crayfish. Speaking of the wide glide, I've noticed from your shows, topwater lures, some of the most exciting ways to fish, of course. What is it about the wide glide that it's so different from other walk the dog type of lures from the past? What is it that really drives the fish crazy?
That's a good question. I think that ultimately all of our greatest, now I'm going to back up on you. Fish are like in two different categories. You got fish that eat each other, you got fish that eat bugs. And it's like a Venn diagram. It overlaps. And
Okay.
sometimes there'll be so many bugs that a fish that normally eats other fish will shift over. And the inverse is also true. But what's fascinating is the trigger mechanism that causes a fish to eat a bug versus the trigger mechanism that flips the switch of a fish that's a fish eater are 180 degrees apart. And understanding the difference between a dead drifted object that does not react to the presence of a predator versus an animated object that reacts to the presence of a predator. Understanding those two differences, I think, are the two most important things in all of angling.
Okay. Well, with the diver frog, I was speaking to you previously. It's just about time for that to start firing up here in the Pacific Northwest. Can you tell us just a little bit more about the diver frog and the materials that you've used, such as TPR, the thermoplastic rubber, over your traditional, rubber strands and things like that?
Well, actually, where this started was when I was a teenager. I had a bass I was trying to catch on a fly that was a great big largemouth. It was probably 7 or 8 pounds.
Okay.
And I knew I had a fixed amount of time. I lived on this lake, but I was guiding on the river. And I was trying to figure out a fly that would do what a suic would do. That's a musky lure. That was
Okay.
the very first of the insane non-mechanical random action lures. And I'd noticed that when you get it to go below a fish's line of vision, he'd come up on it. You can get fish to follow, but to get him to bite, you gotta get him to come up on the lure. I had this bass would work a popper and he'd come flying after it, and then he'd come behind it and just wouldn't bite it. In fact, come out, and I couldn't get him to bite. And I was trying to figure out how to make a fly that would dive. And I had a bunch of different designs, and I came up with a collar. It was amazing how it worked. The first guy that I took it out, I got it to work. I'm on the end of my dock, I get in my boat, I zip to this spot, catch this bass, 6'8", 6 pounds, 8 ounces. Big bass from Minnesota.
Big bass.
And then I had to shoot to the river, and I'm guiding the president of 3M, and I'd given his buddy a fly that I'd made, and his buddy catches a 3.5 pound smallmouth, which is what we called an honor roll.
Okay.
Well, now my guy's like, what'd you give him that fly for? Now he's got, so I pull him up this little river that's a tributary. Almost killed me to get this guy up over the top of this chute. This is the best place I know of in miles and miles. He's fishing nothing. I give him this diving bait, the first Dahlberg diver.
Okay.
He puts it on, he throws a sloppy cast. He's using a 10 weight. It's a sloppy cast. It lands and this fish blasts it. He jerks and it comes out of the fish's mouth and lands in the middle of the river, and he's turning around to straighten out his line. The fly goes under the water, and blam, another one grabs it, and he turns to me, he says, Larry, I think you got something here. So I went back in my workshop, and I made one that I could cast with a bait caster, and had some phony legs on it that I couldn't make work right, but I made it dive exactly like a frog. And I thought, ooh, and I threw it in a drawer. There were two things I was trying to make, a frog and a crayfish.
Okay.
And I knew that there were certain physical characteristics that mattered. Like I could take a dead one, put it in front of a fish, and they wouldn't react to it. It was perfect. It was a real thing, but I just killed it, and now it doesn't work.
Didn't trigger that. It didn't trigger that.
It didn't work. Now why is it? This is perfect. It can't look more real. I did the same thing with crabs, with permit, crayfish, with bass. I used to catch these bucketfuls of crayfish that I'd climb up in the trees and they'd just throw them to the fish and just watch them react. And I learned that when they were in the kung fu position, drifting down, a smallmouth would actually back up and move out of the way. But the minute it turned to get away, bam, he'd get snapped. At other times I'd watch him cruise, and you'd see a pack of them cruising, like wild turkeys hunting grasshoppers, and they'd flush crayfish and work as a team, but it was always that movement. And so what I wanted to do was create something that both looked real, but more importantly, that had exactly the same visual cues
Okay.
that the real thing had. And so the first one was this frog. When TPR got invented, we had a material that was going to be both flexible and strong. And I knew that if I got the shape right, got the collar right, got the balance right, because I'd done this 30 odd years before, that I could get a frog that would actually look like a frog and do frog, and that's what this is.
Exactly.
Crayfish came from exactly the same sort of set of thinking. I just observed them, watched how they operated. But the most challenging thing was getting a flipper that would flip. All of our other crayfish were just minnow baits.
Exactly.
And what made the fish buy them was when they'd ricochet off the bottom and so on. I'd use the River to Sea Yabby. I don't know if you ever used it.
I have used the Yabby.
God, I couldn't believe how effective it was. Just sitting still. But what I wanted was something that when you animate it, it would do crayfish.
That action.
And so we overcame some of this. In any lure design, you've got shape, of course. You've got overall balance. You've got specific gravity, and then you've got center of gravity to deal with.
Okay.
And both of these creatures, those elements are so touchy, it's unbelievable. But speaking about fish in this, you were talking it's a little early for frogs.
Yes.
What frogs do in the fall, of course, is there's a thing called the frog run. It used to be huge, and then young anglers forgot about it because DDT got invented, or frog populations dropped, and so on. Well, our frog populations are back up again. And this traditional frog run that always happened in the fall is a big deal now.
Okay.
And what you need to do is find the places that the frogs sleep in the wintertime. And it's critical both in the fall and in the spring.
Okay.
Because where they woke up in the spring, or
They're
where they
gonna
went to
be-
bed in the winter, they're
I
going to
gotcha.
wake up in the spring. And they're almost like in super slow motion because the water's so cold. But what they do, they bury themselves in the mud, and then they'll slowly come out. And the places where it happens first, of course, is in the shallow parts of the lake that are thermal magnets.
Okay.
Anyway, what you can do with this, most frogs are sort of like surfboards, and they imitate what a frog does when he tries to get away on land. The other option a frog has got is to try to bury into the bottom, and he actually does that more often than he tries to get on land.
Okay.
What this is designed to do is that it'll sit, at an angle, and if you just sort of crank it with your tip up, it'll slide along like a regular frog will.
Okay.
But on a long cast, if you just stroke, stop, it'll keep swimming down, down, down. It'll go down maybe 30 inches. Well, let's say that you got some frogs that are sleeping in 4 feet of water, that they've nested down into 4 feet of water. What you do is make a long cast, stick your tip down in the water about 3 feet. So you can add another 2 feet to that. So that means it's going to get down about 5.
Okay.
Just go stroke, and don't pull too hard. Just a frog swims about that far. A frog this
A
big, when
good
he
12
kicks,
inches.
he goes about that far. A frog that's littler doesn't go quite as far when he kicks. It's
Okay.
swim it down to the bottom. When you feel it make bottom contact, keep pressure on it, and just start shaking it like that. And what'll happen is mud and stuff will start to come up, and it'll also emit a low frequency vibration. Fish can hear, like, we've got a limit, a low frequency limit to our hearing, but a fish is like 0.5 vibrations per second. I think our minimum is like 16 or something for a human.
Okay.
So it's
much more detailed.
Well, fish live in an environment that's wired for sound, especially low frequency. But anyway, you start hammering down the bottom, they can hear it for some distance, and they'll come investigate it. And then if you want, you just let it maybe float up that far, and then just do it again, and they just slam it.
Okay.
Because it's totally vulnerable. And that's another way you can fish it. You can actually, with a long rod and a long cast, you can fish this thing down 8 feet if you wanted to.
All right. Well, on top of the diver frog, you've kind of mentioned the crayfish a little bit with its swimming action. One of the things that I've really noticed is that pulsation that you get. So, you're talking about the sound and you're talking about the movement, but the pulsation in the clacking crayfish, I think, is one of the driving aspects of what attracts that
No
initial.
question.
Okay.
And part of it is speed and part of it is sound. And if you listen to the sound underwater, the frequency of this is almost identical.
Okay.
And it was based on the same principle, but what you want to do is either one of these, if you can observe how they actually operate in the water, and then just be the crayfish, be the frog. If you want, you can burn it all the time, but you're usually better off, let it sit, stop, let it sit, maybe even just shake it, just barely walk it, because they'll bite it when it's moving, they'll bite it when it's standing still, they'll bite it when it's falling, and you just be the crayfish.
Okay.
And vary speed is one of the most important things, and that means speed is dead stop also.
Okay.
And finding that range is often the whole secret.
All right. Well, we've seen you on your show fish for tarpon, giant trevally, sturgeon, catfish, peacock bass. We've just about watched you catch almost anything and everything from both freshwater and saltwater. Can you tell us, through all your adventures, your most memorable snap-off, the heartbreaker that you got to the boat and you just couldn't land it?
Yep.
Yeah?
I've been really lucky most of my life, like most of the big ones I've actually caught. But I had a fish, I was fishing black snook off the coast of Costa Rica with a guy named Jorge. He was the greatest snook fisherman who ever lived, probably. He was also the head of Merck Pharmaceutical for South America. And he was a jig guy, and I started using live bait. And I'd go in this little lagoon that was right next, there's a 15-foot tide, so when the tide would come out, run the lagoon, catch a little jack, quick, bring it out. I'm catching these snooks, and there was a little narrow opening to this thing, and there was a big root wad. I'd only been there a couple of days, and okay, the root wad, that's got to be the magic spot. When the tide changes, there's like about 5 minutes of this critical period. My last day, I can't catch a jack for bait, and I know I got just minutes. I catch a 26-inch short spine snook. That's all I got for bait. So I say to Jorge, what should I put on, which hook? We pick out it was a Tiemco tarpon hook, about a 4.0. Man, it looks small. He says, no use that. So I hook him up. And I'm trying to get him to swim out, and he's not wanting to swim out. And it's only, I want him to go 30 feet. And he's sort of avoiding this area. And I'm looking, and the tide is running out, and I see this kind of a big log thing that's floating out, and oh damn, I'm going to get hung up in this thing, and I'm trying to steer my snook away from it. No matter what I do, this log is going to get hung up in my snook. It's within 8 feet of me, and the water's a little off color, and I look, and holy crap, that is not a log. It is a snook. And the snook is like that big around and 5 feet long. And then he jumps on top of it. He goes screaming out, and my friend Jorge, who has landed, his friend Coco, had caught and has pictures of a 75-pounder that they have caught. And at this time, that's 15 pounds bigger than the world record. This thing comes out of the water, takes off Jorge screaming, 75, maybe 80, biggest snook I've ever seen. And I'm rigged. I've got heavy gear. Everything's fine. Fish comes up. He shakes. I lock down on him and bonk. Loose. The hook didn't bend this way. The hook actually bent like around that way,
twisted.
And it got caught in that little button. He's still swimming out there somewhere, so you asked, I told you, and I'm still kind of disappointed about it.
Well, going into that, what about your most memorable landing? I mean, something has to stick out through all your adventures.
There's a couple, actually. The first, I went to a place off of West Africa, just on a hunch that there'd be big marlin there, and then they had a military revolution. And I landed one that they estimated that I actually caught 18 of them over 600 pounds in 10 days. I'd never fished marlin before. And I was with a group who'd never caught one either in a boat, so it was quite interesting. We caught one that was estimated at 1,300 by a guy from Marlin magazine. But I think I remember more jarring to me. We caught a Nile perch. It was about 8.5 feet long.
Okay.
It came up by the boat. When I saw it come up by the boat, I almost had a heart attack. And we had a big catfish I caught in Suriname. That it was 250 miles up a river, just on a hunch. And it took 3 days to get there. And we hooked up with this fish that almost pulled me out of the boat. And it turned a 32-foot boat backwards and started pulling us upstream. And when it came up, I thought it was a bull shark. I was, what? And it was a catfish that was large enough, to put it in perspective, to eat the world record flathead, the world record channel, and the world record blue cat, like in one day.
One day. I can't even imagine.
I couldn't either. I still think about it. It was like, that couldn't have been real. And the sun was just setting, so we had to deal with it really quick and then let it go.
And when it was off.
Yeah, when it took off, it whipped its tail. And my friend Cesar and I got both blown 5 feet. It was like getting hit with a fire hose. It was incredible. It was just incredible.
Sounds like a whale of a fish.
It was really fun.
Well, as a close friend to Patrick Sabile, who we all know, most of your fans, I was actually intrigued by a statement that he said on one of your latest episodes, and it's regarding, you know, testing your lures, and he actually said the best time to test a lure is when the fish are fired up. Absolutely. And not the other way around. Can you explain to the viewers of FHC Outdoors why that's so?
Well, oftentimes, you know, the existential angst in angling, I mean, you've got fish you can see, you've got fish you can't see. When you're in a situation where you can't see them, you don't know whether they're there or not.
Exactly.
And you start changing things around, or you might just accidentally stumble into a fish that would have bit on a tennis shoe. Where you really find out what they will bite and when they won't bite is when you've got a whole bunch of different fish, they're active, and you can learn as much by throwing stuff that they don't react to as you do throwing stuff that they do react to.
Okay.
So it's sort of like if you want to go learn about agates, go to a place where there's a lot of agates, a lot of encounters. You need encounters.
Okay. Well, it makes sense to me. You know, the truly talented anglers can read water. You know, they acknowledge environmental impacts on the fish, and still be successful when it comes to catching big fish. I mean, you've caught, you know, huge fish all over the place, but you don't fish, you know, stocked ponds, and you don't go to the nearest hot spots that everyone's raving about. You literally go out on the edge, and yet, you know, you're still able to capture these big fish on camera. Are there any tips for the adventurers out there, people that, you know, every day, you know, maybe they only have limited time on the weekends to go fish, but yet they kind of still want to see that impact of, you know, catching larger than average fish?
Well, I think that maybe the biggest problem people have is that they confuse two different terms that are applied to fishing. People say fishermen need to be patient. It's easy to confuse relentlessness with patience.
Okay.
You don't want to be patient.
No patience.
None. You want to be relentless. What you do, I mean, truly, here's where I am. How much range do I have? How much time do I have?
Okay.
What's my range? Define what are the options within the range that you have to fish. And then you start rubbing the silver off the lottery card. And you don't leave a stone unturned. And you don't go there with preconceived ideas unless you've got a really long history. And then your preconceived ideas aren't really preconceived ideas.
Gotcha.
They are, you know, proven historical. But you just don't want to always go on blind faith. Most people fish yesterday's fish.
Okay. All right. Well, Larry, you know, we truly appreciate you sitting down today with us and River to Sea. You know, we've learned a lot from you. We look forward to your seminars here at Wholesale Sports coming up here pretty quickly. But, you know, I think we've explored a few sides and you've given us some great information. And we just want to say thanks to you and River to Sea for sitting down with us today.
No, it's my pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Nice to meet you.
You too.